there up to it. I'm very fortunate to have incredible colleagues. I want to thank my current superintendent, Sarita Beeman, and Chairman Kraus, and the other members of the Seminole County Board for being supportive of my candidacy here. I live currently in Lake Mary with my wife, Nicole. She's in the audience. We've been married 19 years, so we'll celebrate the 20th anniversary in July. If you get to talk with her, she'll tell you she actually gets credit for 27 years because we met in high school. And we have one son who is in elementary school, which adds a lot of depth to the work when you're building initiatives and then your own student gets to participate in the things that you and your teams have worked on. It adds dimension and even greater appreciation for the teachers in schools who are doing tremendous work every day with our students. So again, I'm very thankful to be here and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. With that,
all right, I am up first. Thank you so much for giving us the brief history about yourself. Congratulations on your upcoming anniversary that is happening. I'm going to be asking questions today that pertain to the board and the superintendent relationship. So I have 5 questions that I have picked out to ask, and I will start with the first one. What is the most important part of the superintendent's job and why?
Thank you, Vice Chair. That's a great question to start on. The superintendent role is so multifaceted and certainly important from a visibility in the community role. From a policy perspective, the board sets policy and then it's the superintendent's job to implement it and to get the staff behind it and executing those plans so that we're moving forward as a district. In many ways, the superintendent is the communicator in chief. They're the person that's often invited to get out in front of groups and carry the message of the district. And that message really should be embedded in the strategic plan. The board has a strategic plan and it's the superintendent's job to put the pieces in place to execute that plan and achieve those metrics. So I think that's the kind of external visibility piece of the superintendent role. And then of course, there's the myriad of responsibilities daily that a superintendent is dealing with internally. And I think over the last 3 or 4 years, especially with regards to retention and recruitment of staff. And if you look back at my application materials, we often say recruitment and retention, but right now it's about retention and recruitment. And so I think the superintendent plays that key role in carrying the message and trying to keep the district moving forward to the benefit of all students.
Thank you. Based on your knowledge of Brevard's system, our system, what do you believe should be the top 2 priorities of our school system?
So the first is that academic outcomes are why we are here. We can get a lot of things done as a school district, as a community lever, but we have to deliver on student learning first in order to do all of those other things. So Brevard has a long history of academic excellence, and certainly the pandemic and the challenges of the last 3 years have caused all districts to kind of bobble a little bit. And so now we have a standards transition and new instructional materials, new assessments, and this is really the time to focus on sustaining that academic achievement, because with that A school grade, with that academically high-performing school district status from the Department of Education, with those things in place, with learning growth happening, then we talk about the other kind of key pieces with the school district in a community, and all of the good things that are done, but the learning has to be there, and that's even more important now in the area of competition. I think the second priority for Brevard, and I saw this extensively on the tour this morning, is the growth that you're experiencing in one part of the district, which is really exciting. And you've got new construction. Everybody loves that. New schools opening. And then but you also have to be sure that you're sustaining the excellence and the excitement in all of the other regions of the county as well. And so that becomes a bit of a balancing act as you look at new programs, new opportunities, and how you're spreading that out so that the entire county is benefiting from growth, from prosperity, from academic excellence, and not that any one part is moving faster than the others.
Thank you. How do you ensure that board members have the information that they need before being asked to make a vote on an issue of concern?
That's a great question. And the superintendent is responsible for the communication to each board member. And I've been brought up in a system where we've been taught that each board member should get the same information, and questions should be answered, but each person on the board needs to have the same data, the same access to answers, so that when the board comes together as a whole, there aren't surprises, and everybody can move on the same page. There's certainly a lot that goes into prep for each board workshop and each meeting. The consent agenda is a powerful and efficient tool for getting work done, but each board member needs to be confident in the items on that consent agenda and what they're approving. And when the staff, the superintendent and staff, do a good job with board meeting preparation, and when the board is able to approve a consent agenda 5-0 or make a hard decision but get to the same place, it matters. It makes a difference to the staff. The principals see it. The district leadership sees it, that when the board is moving together in the same direction, you build momentum. And the key to that is no surprises to each board member, and really good prep work before each meeting to be sure that each board member is comfortable. That doesn't mean that everyone's always going to agree, but it means that everyone feels like they have the information to make the decision.
Thank you. Describe what you believe to be the ideal working relationship with the school board. And when you have an adversarial situation with a board member, how would you resolve that?
So again, I've spent the last 10 years in a school district office being taught how to do this, and then the last 3 years in an executive director and deputy role, working almost daily with school board members. And I think again, the key is open, honest communication. The news will not always be good, right? There will be bad news sometimes, but are we communicating that again to each board member, and are we communicating it clearly and providing all of the information? I think in terms of the superintendent's relationship with each board member, there has to be comfort that frequency of communication is good. And again, each board member, each of you has, as elected officials, different professional and personal lives. And so people work at different times of the day, and the superintendent and the senior leadership team have to adapt to that to make sure that each board member has the information they need. I think, nothing substitutes for a good sit-down, face-to-face meeting, a conversation, an acknowledgement that there may be differences of opinion, but how do we work together to get to a good place? And again, even if ultimately a board member feels like I have to vote no on this, if it's just a legitimate difference of viewpoint, that's okay. What's not okay is when the board doesn't feel like they have all of the information they need to make that decision.
Thank you for that answer. What are the first 3 things that you are going to do if you're hired as our superintendent?
So acknowledging that an external candidate always has a different kind of entry plan than perhaps an internal candidate. I think the first piece of anything is listening and getting out and really engaging with as many stakeholders as possible. And I think each board member has a role to play there. You have the existing community and business connections. You know the history of how things unfold, and a superintendent coming in from the outside is going to need that support to say, this is, kind of, this is the lay of the land. So I think initially it's talking with each board member and kind of mapping out, that engagement strategy. And then it's getting out and actually listening. I think that's the second key piece. And then, in terms of the timeline here, I think the third piece is making sure that we are ready to go for the 23-24 school year. And you have an experienced leadership team who's already looking down the road at all of that, but coming in and just working department by department to be sure that the short-term priorities have been addressed and are moving along, and then really listening to each department head, each member of the cabinet about what those long-term plans they have are, how they align to the strategic plan, how they support the district's vision. And then from there, I think as a new superintendent, you're trying to synthesize all of that and get some clarity around what are the things that need to be addressed first beyond August 10th and having students in ready to go for the school year.
Thank you for those answers. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been asking a funny icebreaker, because this feels a little bit like a hearing. And so just to kind of break it up, my icebreaker question to you is, what is your favorite football team?
At the college level, I support the Gators. I'm a University of Florida graduate.
All right.
I don't know if that's the right answer or not.
There's
but,
no right or wrong answer
that's
here.
good.
So that's
well, on college football, for some people,
Okay.
there is. However, I grew up from Miami. I grew up in Miami. Went to lots of Hurricanes games as a kid. So our families support a lot of the Florida teams.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for your answers to your questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Makes you feel any better, I don't watch football, so you could say whatever you want.
Good to know.
Okay. And so my area is academic excellence. So currently there is a significant achievement gap for minority students and students with disabilities when compared to white and non-disabled peers. So what specific steps would you take to ensure academic success is distributed equitably across our district?
That's a great question, and that's the ultimate challenge that nearly all school districts across the country are facing. The achievement gap is not an easy problem. It's a gritty problem. It's a long-term problem. And again, if it were simple to solve, it would have been done already. And so I think the first step is to really understand the data, not just at the surface level, but you've got to get into schools where your achievement gaps are larger and say, what's the difference? So what's happening that things are a little more narrow at school A than at school B? And those root causes are complex and they interact in different ways. So I think, really pushing into that data. And then it's all about action planning around evidence-based practice. There is research about how to do this, but the key is not to start and stop. It's a long game problem. It's not something that you're going to fix in 1 or 2 or 3 years. So much of what we do in public education is driven in shorter cycles, right? We have a legislative session every year. We have board member terms at 4 years. Typically, strategic plans are at 5 years. For the last 20 years, we've had a lot of changes in accountability systems, and you're always kind of resetting that data. So I think figuring out how to build a long-term strategy and then executing it so that you get that gradual gap closure. And a lot of that is about building a cadre of principals and assistant principals who can have resilience around the problem, because you're going to have up and down years. But then also that there's not just one or two people who know how to do it, that there are lots of people. And what you often see in school districts is you have a principal that takes a school from a low grade, a C or a D or an F, up to an A. And then what happens, everybody goes, that's amazing. And then that person gets pulled to the district, and 3 years later, that school's right back where you started. And so again, it's not about having one superhero to do the work. You've got to figure out how to build high skill across the entire talented principal corps, and then how to sustain that gradual growth so that eventually you do that, get that gap. ESE is another another issue completely. And if there's more time, maybe we can talk more about that. But again, it's another issue that I think all of our districts are struggling with.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. Detail what you've done in the past and what you would do to facilitate an increase in third grade reading proficiency rates.
So what we've been working to do in Seminole over the last couple of years, particularly with the standards change, is to use that as an opportunity to identify and surplus or purge, if you will, older practices that really aren't aligned with the research. And so we've used a combination of instructional materials funds and ESSER funds to really listen to teachers about what they say they need, and then providing those needs, but really going to the research to be sure that we're selecting materials that are evidence-based. Teachers are incredibly creative and resourceful, and we just want to be sure that when we're selecting activities, selecting materials for use in classrooms, that there's an evidence base to them, and that the time that they have with students is using those highest quality materials. I think the other investment of time has been in professional learning communities. And in districts where there's a deep commitment to getting just past the grade level team and into that notion of all of us who are on the second grade team, we own all of the second graders, and we design intervention and share students, and we're not afraid to put our data on the table and say, how are you getting those results? Because for whatever reason, my students aren't getting there, and how do we exchange that information? So the more we have deep teacher collaboration, I think the better opportunity we have to differentiate and support students. Because really, when you're talking about third grade reading, as we get toward the end of third grade, it really is about each student and what do you have to do differently to illuminate that love of reading and that persistence with complex text. So I think, again, it's about the materials that you're giving teachers to use, and then the time you're giving them for authentic collaboration.
Describe a situation where you were clearly instrumental in facilitating a change in the way career and college readiness was approached in your district. How was the change meaningful and/or successful, and what measures were used to determine the success of the change initiative?
Sure. So this is a passion area of mine, and my background is academic. I'm a high school social studies teacher by training, but in 2013, my former superintendent tasked me with taking on a new group that he branded Education Pathways, or ePathways. And the first step in the process was to substantially increase career and technical education in Seminole County, which historically was a college and university prep district. And in response to changing student interests, changing family needs, there was a need to significantly scale up CTE. So with the help of funding from a voter-approved millage, we got into the CTE game very, very quickly, and it was very metric driven. So we looked at expanding the number of career and professional education academies that met those kind of DOE gold standards. We looked at expanding the number of industry certifications earned, first at high school and then down into middle school. When the legislature approved the digital tool certificates, which was technically K through 8, but targeted at middle school, we jumped into that very, very quickly. And with the help of some middle school principals who were really excited about kind of energizing their technology electives and some of their other non-core courses, we scaled up digital tool certificates really in about a year's time, and had thousands of those earned, and that's all sustained. So all of that then translates the industry certs and the digital tool certificates into supplemental funding that's coming into programs and into the district from the FEFP, and then you use that money to reinvest in those programs. And so, we were able to open advanced manufacturing and modeling and simulation and bioscience research, as well as expanding, culinary and some of the digital arts. And again, many of those programs are in Brevard, and it's just about continuously upgrading them. For Seminole, it was a substantial expansion, and of course, the best part was that students and families really responded, and those have become very popular programs. So despite starting with an academic background, I certainly enjoy the career and tech world and the value that it adds to our students and families.
What do you feel is the single most important piece of data that will drive our district forward?
I think as we move back into the full accountability system with FAST, we want to start going back to the low quartile ELA and math results. So the percentage of students in the lowest 25% who are making learning gains. And once upon a time in the Florida accountability system, if you didn't hit that 50% at your school, there was a penalty of a letter grade. It was, we called it the trap door, that even if you had enough points to get an A, if half of your lowest quartile was not making learning gains, you took that letter grade penalty. We don't know exactly all the contours of next year's accountability system, but that's a key metric, because if you're doing well in that area, if you're doing well with if your lowest 25% of learners are making learning gains, chances are your highest 75% of learners are making the learning gains as well. And then, Mrs. Jenkins, that gets back to that achievement gap closure. If you're moving that lowest 25%, your achievement gap closure is happening because you tend to see your students with disabilities, your English language learners, your struggling readers sitting in that group. So I think it's going to be very important to refocus on that metric next year, especially for districts that are looking to either get back to or hold their A grade.
Thank you. Do I still have time? Okay. No, it's okay. I always save the last one on purpose. Based on what you know of our school system, what do you think is the greatest potential for improvement, and where are our greatest opportunities?
Well, the greatest opportunity is leveraging the dynamic Space Coast to go even further than you have already. This is such a unique county and community, and the revitalization of aerospace and engineering, the opportunities for students here are boundless. And so, so again, CTE is already a strength in Brevard, but I think you have the opportunity with the growth of some of the companies that are either moving into the area or expanding. You have that opportunity to build on that. the talent of the professionals who work in this community is such an asset to the school district from a volunteer perspective, from classroom expertise, from mentoring and internships. And again, I know that all of that is already in place. So I think it's how do you create a multiplier effect? How do you scale it up?
You got your icebreaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's your favorite ice cream?
Favorite ice cream? They're all good.
Good answer.
It's definitely my vice. But yeah, anything with any kind of combination of chocolate is great.
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to say my area is the exceptional workforce, and there's a couple questions in here wrapped around some of the things that are important to me. So the first question we have is, what is your immediate plan for teacher, substitute, and bus driver recruitment?
Another big issue, right, that's facing all districts, and your voters, your taxpayers have already given you an incredible tool with the millage and the opportunity to be more competitive with salaries than you would typically be or be able to be in a school district given the budget. And so I think that's important, particularly the percentage of the millage that has been allocated, to support employee compensation. So that's a very, very powerful messaging tool, and there are lots of districts that don't have that opportunity. So I think so that's one part of it. I think another part of it is continuing to talk about quality of life in a school district. There are lots of advantages, and I think that's why you see sometimes, in fact, I met a new teacher this morning who had made a transition into public education from other parts of the workforce. And I think we have to continue to message all of the advantages of working for a school district. Both kind of the structure of the day, but also the intangibles of truly making a difference for children. And I think we have to highlight those examples more, so that people really take a look at it and understand the options. And then finally, and I think all districts are heading in this direction, the importance of grow our own, right? That we have a captive audience of high school students in our schools, and we should be talking to them about career pathways, whether they stay in Brevard or college or for college or they go somewhere else. We should be talking with them as early as possible about all of the opportunities that Brevard Public Schools has. And again, I don't think that's a unique strategy. I think all of the districts are looking at programs and pathways to bring graduates back to their schools. The other piece is that when that happens, when you're bringing former students, graduates back in 4 years later, as teachers or paraprofessionals or in whatever role, that's tremendously gratifying to the people who are already here, right? To the long-term teachers who help produce those graduates. And it's exciting to see one of your former students working in a classroom. And so I think the more that we do grow your own, the more gratifying it is for longer term employees. It helps cement that retention.
Thank you. Next question is, how do you make sure professional development programs / initiatives have impacted the knowledge, skills, and practices of educators?
Well, I think, Chair, where we have to start with that is we have to be sure that we're talking to our educators about what they believe they need. Often when in my district, when we do focus groups with teachers, the number one request is for time, right? And that's the hardest thing to grant because the structure of public education is just set up a certain way, and we're all struggling to find more time. But I think where you free up time, making sure that it's being used efficiently and that it's focused, and that we're addressing what teachers need. The second part of that is that we're hearing them and we're adapting our professional development offerings so that there are dynamic opportunities. One thing that we did in Seminole last summer, and we'll repeat this summer, was we used our ESSER funding to create a summer educator conference. We called it the best summer ever, and really targeted around learning loss and academic recovery. And so we offered every teacher the opportunity to spend an extra 5 days, not at their own school, but at a host school working with members of their PLC to dive deeper into the academic standards, to get into the new ELA and mathematics materials that had been purchased, so that they were going into the first day of school with an understanding of the curriculum framework, with a deeper knowledge and comfort with the standards, and with time to work through new materials. And so our teachers who took advantage of that reported that they were really able to hit the ground running this year. And again, we got so much positive feedback on that we're going to repeat that same opportunity this summer, 2 years into the new standards, so that teachers have that opportunity to deepen. So I think it's again about talking to teachers about their needs, creating opportunities that are attractive to them, and then going out and monitoring what you're seeing in schools to say, are we seeing any evidence that what we've provided and what we've practiced in a PD environment is now being implemented? And if not, we've got to go back and say, okay, where's the gap and what do we have to do to fix it?
No, I appreciate that. Following up. The next question I have is, what will any teachers organization / union that you have worked with tell us about you? What will support staff organizations say the same?
Good question. So I am a member of the bargaining team in the deputy role. So I get to observe all of that. Our structure, we try to be a bit more formal in terms of our chief negotiator is our spokesman, and so we wait to answer questions, and so I'm there if there's an instructional question emerges, and there's that kind of back and forth. Informally, again, I've been in the same district as a school administrator and then as a district administrator, and generally the relationship with the union has been positive, in terms of our being open to listening, to challenges even outside of bargaining, so that we're addressing issues before they boil up to the level of a grievance. So I've been involved where there are questions about instruction or whatever, and really the goal is to when there are changes, when there are mandates, to try to implement them with teacher time and convenience in mind. And so, for example, the instructional materials changes, the cataloging of classroom libraries, all of that impacts teachers. And so, are we giving them tools to be able to do that quickly and efficiently, so that those complaints either are minimized or don't kind of boil over?
Thank you for that. What has your district done to develop and maintain a collaborative relationship with employees? Include issues of morale, communication, team building. Describe your role in this. What do you do to make it fun?
Sure, absolutely. So one of my favorite activities, and it's been a long-standing tradition in Seminole, is that the senior leaders spend the first day of school at about 5:30 at the bus depot, greeting and waving to the drivers as they head out. And that's an easy gesture, right? It's just getting up early and getting out there, but it says we're all in this together. And then the last couple of years, there have been random follow-up meals served out at transportation, and regardless of who's doing that organization, it's about the senior leadership team showing up, saying thank you, being present, and that goes a long way, or has gone a long way, with our transportation department, with facilities, with maintenance. I think we've used a lot of different techniques, over the years um, to uh, to celebrate teachers and employees. We do a veteran recognition at each board meeting. That's proved to be very positive. Just as much gratitude to teachers and staff as possible. And when it's specific and it's genuine, it goes a long way.
Thank you for that. Next question is wrapped around new technology. Describe a time when you led the implementation of a new technology in your district. If you can talk about what technology it was, what did you learn about the technology, what challenges, obstacles did you have, what success was the technology, and how did you measure the results of that? Just basically, we implemented X, here's what it did.
Sure. So going back a few years, my first job at the district office in Seminole was administering our Race to the Top programs. That was in 2011. That was an Obama administration initiative, federal funding coming to districts at a time when the economy was tough. The infusion of money allowed certain projects to keep going. There were specific requirements. It wasn't, do with it whatever you want. So there were some specific requirements around what at the time was called the local instructional improvement system. And one of the things that we put into place was a student performance data management system, which is, where you're housing really all of your student analytics. It takes you a step beyond the student information system. And what was unique here is that we ended up selecting a vendor that was new to Florida and that frankly submitted a low bid in order to get into a high performing district in Florida. And what I enjoyed about that was that because it was a newer product and because it was new to Florida, we had tremendous influence over the customization. And so my very small team and I got to map out what the RTI, now MTSS, module looked like. And so we did all of the storyboarding, and then the programmers came in and made it look right and made it operate correctly. What didn't work right on the functional end, we owned that, right? What didn't work right on the technical, the programming end, they had to fix. 12 years later, we still use the same system. And we've built lots of little enhancements. There's a risk scoring algorithm in there to help us with early warning, even earlier than some of the metrics that are in statute. And so that's a system that I definitely got to implement pieces of, and that continues to be used today for a variety of purposes. More recently, a lot of technology was put in as a result of the CTE upgrades. And so, when you're putting in an advanced manufacturing lab, you start learning a lot about CNC machining and all of those specialty products. And again, as the person managing the work, you've got to understand it, but you're also relying on your teacher experts and different organizations to try to use that money as best you can. So, both kind of a data example and then a more practical student equipment example.
No, I appreciate that. That concludes my questions. Ms. Campbell, you have the next round. Thank you.
Thank you.
I haven't had one
He
since the
didn't.
beginning.
He didn't
I
have
just didn't
one.
start one, so
All right.
whatever.
So we can't start one now.
Can't start one.
Can't
We
do
have
it
to do
because
it the
everything
exact
has to
same
be
way
the
for every
same.
person.
Same
So I have to
questions.
tell you
There we go.
All
that
right.
we all picked areas of our passion except for Mr. Trent
Here we go
because he
again.
got the leftovers. So my area of passion and questions is community connections. So first of all, what are your ideas about engaging families who are inexperienced with participating or who have negative experiences with education? And how would you help your staff to reach out to such families successfully and respectfully?
That's a great question, and it becomes even more important right in the HB1 environment, because families do have more choices than ever. And I think the challenge for school districts in Florida is going to be, how do we leverage the scale advantage that we have by being a large district, but how do you make it feel like it's not? How do you make every family, every school, feel like an N of one? That requires a lot of thinking, a lot of customized approaches. I think all of us who are educators retrained into leadership are also we're going to need to rely more on help from folks who have expertise in strategic communication and marketing, to kind of fine tune those messages and really understand how to do that work. I think in Brevard specifically, the geographic uniqueness, right? The 72 miles north to south creates, although it's one county, you've got a lot of different communities. And so that message is going to have to be more narrowly tailored to specific schools, and then down to specific families. In terms of engaging communities that or families that maybe, as you said, weren't successful in school themselves, I think that's the importance of trying to go out into the community and not just doing everything from a district office or from a headquarters building. Again, just being at McNair this morning, very important community school, and your staff, at each school has to know the history of the area and how it's evolved, and how to utilize that as an asset in talking with families.
Thank you. What has been your experience or interaction with local business and community groups? What have you specifically done to ensure a positive working relationship with economic development groups or chambers or local philanthropic groups?
Sure. Thank you. So I think the first part of that is showing up, right? And that's challenging because there are a lot of different groups kind of all working, at the same issues. So how do you, you get invitations to different, to different events or different opportunities, and it's about going out and doing those things and then following up with the people that you meet. Certainly in the career and tech world, the program advisory committees that are required are a good way to engage with a lot of different partners in an organized fashion. But then I think it's about really working to understand what each business partner can do and what each business partner is interested in doing and how that aligns to the district goals. So for example, both Brevard and Seminole do a lot of work around student internships. And you have to put some parameters in place, but then you also want to you want to be able to adapt to each particular business's either limits or preferences, right? So there are some businesses where you're not going to be able to do an internship for a student under the age of 18, but you might be able to do a job shadow or a bring the business into the school. So I think it's about kind of each partner's unique needs and then staying engaged with them. And that's where I think it's important that the district leadership team, be available. It can't just be a single person, but that lots of people are going out and hopefully the same people repeatedly to the same organizations. I certainly in Seminole have gotten to serve on some economic development committees, within chambers, and do some of that work. And the key piece is making the meetings, making the contacts, and then when those folks have, when they have a need or a request from the district, that we follow up on that, and that we provide it. So, for example, in the economic development world, sometimes you have you have a group trying to bring a business to a community, and one of the decisions or one of the factors in that business's relocation is what schools are the children of my employees going to attend? And so often they've got specific questions, and you've got to attend to those in order to be a good partner to the group that's trying to bring them in. And so I think that responsiveness is really important.
Thank you. How important is it, and what specific roles have you played personally in dealing with the legislature, congressional delegations, and county and city officials?
Um, that's an area that when I started my service at the district office, I didn't realize, coming from a school administration role, how critical all of that was going to be. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I have twice gone to Tallahassee to testify or not testify, but present to House and Senate subcommittees. That's an incredible opportunity because you have legislators sitting on these education committees, and they're interested in the policy area, but most of them, not all of them, but most of them haven't worked in a school district or haven't been a classroom teacher. Chair Susan, as you know, it's different when you have classroom teaching experience and you're trying to communicate the complexity of different issues. So I've had a couple of those opportunities to go up and talk to legislators formally. Like Brevard, Seminole has had success with specific legislative appropriations to enhance programs. I've had different roles there. In some cases, I'm the person writing the request. I have been up to Tallahassee then to talk with legislators, and educate them, on those issues. I work closely with our current superintendent as we kind of draft the legislative platform each year in response to what our board members are telling us. And there's an art to crafting that legislative platform, because you have to capture complexity, but you also have to do it succinctly. And so again, those often one-page documents, a lot of work goes into that one page because you're trying to get the message right. In terms of local leaders, again, I think both the kind of formal and informal connections are really important. And again, each of you as board members already has those existing connections. And so sometimes the role of the superintendent is making sure that you have the information you need when a colleague from another board calls you and asks you for information or a question, or says, hey, I heard that this was going on, and you need that quick response from the superintendent or the senior staff, so that you can respond to that and have that productive relationship with your elected colleague. And so I think that's another important role that the superintendent, the senior leadership team needs to play.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Presenting information in a highly charged situation and to a variety of groups is a part of a superintendent's job. Give an example of how you have encountered opposition and how you dealt with the resulting situation.
Great question. Again, going back a few years, I had the opportunity to participate in a rezoning process within Seminole. Our former superintendent, Dr. Walt Griffin, came into his superintendency, and within the first year looked at growth patterns and said, we really need to address some things. And so there ended up being a rezoning of 3 different areas geographically, which were then kind of split up and staffed by two members of the leadership team. And at that point, I was the junior member of the team, and it was a great learning experience for me. But at that time in Seminole, we actually had a process where citizens could submit their own map proposals, which then had to be kind of analyzed at the district level and then communicated back. So I've had, and certainly there's nothing more polarizing than attendance boundary changes, right? Because very few people are happy and lots of people are unhappy. It's just hard work. And it's really about trying to address people's specific concerns, but then also trying to appeal to the greater good, which doesn't work for everyone, but some people do understand. And so I think, and I'm sure there are other, certainly other controversial issues that we've, dealt with over the last 10 years. But it's about trying to be clear in the messaging, particularly formal presentations, right? That you make sure that everybody on that team is on the same page and moving the same direction. Because when we're not, people sense that, and it becomes an issue. And then the second part of that is being as transparent as possible in answering people's questions and acknowledging that you're not going to make everyone happy, but you're trying to make the best decision that you can for students, and trying to manage all of the complexity.
Thank you. All right, I've got one more. Sorry, I'm a note taker. All right. What have you and your district done to respond to the use of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, vaping, etc., by students?
You're exactly right. Another problem that we all face, and I think with vaping, we hear about it from some schools more than others, in terms of principals saying this is a bigger issue here, and then other principals saying I think we have that more under control. And so sometimes you're dealing with more specific behaviors at different campuses. First of all, my personal belief is that your code of conduct should reflect what you're willing to enforce. So sometimes we write things, and then the folks who have to do the work, we're talking about the deans and the behavior support people and the assistant principals, look at that and say, that's impractical, and here's why. And so I think we have to be careful about having a written message that sounds nice on paper, but doesn't reflect what we're actually willing to do. And then I think the second part of that, going back to something we talked about earlier, is the issue of time, right? So you can more heavily increase supervision, but you have to look at that campus supervision plan, and you also have to say, what's the opportunity cost of doing that? What are we giving up? So if all of our assistant principals and deans are standing in front of bathrooms all day, then we're not monitoring instructional quality. And so I think that's the other. And again, if it was an easy answer, it would already be fixed, right? But I think that's the when you decide, okay, we really want to eliminate this problem, then our actions have to match the words that are on paper, and we have to acknowledge what we're giving up in order to do that. And I think, to give another example, the dress code comes up now and then in different districts, and it kind of ebbs and flows, and now we want to have really strict enforcement. And again, you can do that, but you have to weigh the cost too. Certainly, alcohol, drugs, vaping, that has to be taken seriously. You can't say, not our issue. But I do think you have to be intentional about, what's our messaging to families? How are we helping students? How are we enforcing, and tying all of that together? And of course, with students, consistency is really important too. So again, making sure that, again, if a school leadership team has decided to plant a flag on a certain hill and say, we're not going to tolerate this, that everybody on that team is on board and saying the same thing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And my fun question is, what is your favorite animal?
Favorite animal? My elementary school son is quite fond of the clouded leopard. And so we hear about that a lot in our house. And so I think that's just become one of our favorites.
All right, thank you.
Have to look that up.
I know, me too.
Go ahead, Mr. Trent.
All right. So again, thank you for being here. And my my area is operational sustainability. So I know you've been waiting all day for this. So here we go.
I'm ready, Mr. Trent.
All right. What is the most challenging operational issue in school districts today, and how do you approach this challenge?
I really do. I think it's important.
So thinking back to an earlier question as well, I think right now nearly every school district is challenged by transportation, right? And by meeting our obligations with the staff that we have. Everyone's dealing with driver and monitor shortages. You've got the wage pressures in there, and then you just have logistics, and you couple that with the fact that when we talk about operations, there aren't a lot of people who pick up the phone and call transportation and say, I'm thrilled that the bus has been on time every day for the last 3 weeks. Thank you, right? Nobody does that. And so it's that transportation department has challenges every single day. And so, I think that's an area that a lot of districts are looking at. It looks like there's some innovation perhaps coming out of the legislature, and some opportunities to look at ways to supplement your traditional kind of school bus and routing. But I definitely think that's right now an area of significant challenge, and it's a very customer facing area. So when those buses are late through no fault of the district or transportation or whatever, parents do see that, right? And some are going to be understanding, and some are not. And so again, particularly in this area of more choice, more competition, efficiency of transportation is even more important at a time when the labor shortage is a real problem. So I think that's probably our greatest challenge just about in any district.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Share with us an example of when you were especially innovative in addressing a fund gap, such as the situation, the obstacles you encountered, the risk involved, and then lastly, the outcome of that. So a funding gap.
So I guess there are a couple of things I could talk about. I think one thing in Seminole over the years has been that as budgets are tight, you want to keep your central office pretty compact, right? We put our funding in the schools, and so you have a compared to other districts, perhaps a relatively flat organization. And you're trying to do all of this. One thing that we currently do on all of the teams that I lead is every time there's a vacancy, we stop and say, do we need to post that right now? Is that still the most important need, or is this a job that needs to be shifted, or responsibilities revised? And often when you do that exercise, the answer is yes, we absolutely do need this, and let's go ahead and post. But we have done some repurposing. Recently, we lost one of our curriculum specialists to a private industry job, and my director of teaching and learning and I sat and looked at it, and we really felt like, not surprisingly, that media centers were taking up a lot more time, right? The cataloging of all of these libraries, the approval of every book in a library. And so we made a hard decision to shift from that curriculum specialist role to adding a teacher on assignment over in the media area. And then the work of that other person who had departed was still important, and so it had to be divided up and distributed differently among the rest of the team. But the point is, we addressed a need without needing more funding, But it requires, again, a lot of time and analysis. Typically, you have a vacancy, you want to get it up there, you want to get somebody replaced, but in times of scarcity, sometimes you have to make, hard choices, in order to shift. The other thing I'll say, Mr. Trent, is um, federal funding, is divided among multiple grants. And one thing that you want to see in a school district is that all of your federal grant administrators are talking to each other often. And although you can't federal fund, is getting pooling by pooling and dividing how you fund things. So for example, this year our federal project administrators selected grants and based budget X on grants that were very and we all sat in a conference room and line by line, and everybody kind of let down their guard and said, this is what I'm paying for out of my grant. And we went through and talked about, is this aligned to the strategic plan? Is this something that still adds value every single year? Or is this something that has lost its luster and either needs to be redesigned or abandoned? And in the course of doing that, you end up with grant administrators going, that really belongs over here with me, and you should be taking this, or, oh, there's a way for us to split fund, a position or an initiative. And so again, that's about building trust among district leaders, among grant administrators, and sitting down and having those honest conversations.
Well, thank you for that answer. Describe your experience with strategic planning for a large organization.
So currently as deputy superintendent, one of my job duties is to steward the district's strategic plan. And again, it is absolutely the board's strategic plan. We have a 5-year plan that gets reviewed and can be adjusted by the board each year. Some years there are minor adjustments, and they're because of accountability changes. And then in other years, we might rework an entire system initiative. You have four goals in your current strategic plan. Ours is structured a little differently. We have 8 strategic initiatives that we're working on. There's a lot of language overlap actually between our 2 districts' plans. They're just organized differently. So my role currently is to maintain that document, and then each year oversee the results reporting, the reporting of the key performance indicators to the board, and then to work with the initiative owners on what they're seeing in the data, what they're going to report back to the board, and whether they have suggestions, for adjustments. And obviously, I'm working very closely with our superintendent on that. But part of my job is to get the coordination among departments right, so that we're moving forward as a group, so that we're not overwhelming the board with too many changes at once, and that we're kind of crystallizing around what really are the key priorities. And again, I'm surrounded by a great team of people, and we work at it together. But I run kind of point on management of the processes. Beyond that, in prior roles, I wrote what we call our System Initiative C, which is our innovation for college careers and citizenship. Again, it's part of that Education Pathways Initiative. And I was the owner, meaning the person responsible for the outcomes of those key performance indicators. And one of the things I've learned about strategic planning is we have to make sure that we're talking about the strategic plan to all employee groups. And in the day-to-day work of running schools, it's easy for that document to get lost. And people are doing the work toward the attainment of the plan, but we have to make the links explicit. The other piece is that sometimes when you're making decisions as a district leadership team, Others may not understand why you're doing things a certain way. And the answer is often because we're carrying out the plan, and that's why it's important for all stakeholders to know what's in that plan.
Great, thank you for that. How do you ensure climate assessment results are used in school improvement planning across the district?
So in Seminole, we have a total of 3 surveys that go out to stakeholders. And some of those are built internally, some of them are externally validated. And those results, this is actually the time of year that those results are coming in, and that principals are asked to reflect, and our assistant superintendents are reading those and having conversations with principals about what's in that feedback. And then what you want to do is you want to take that feedback directly into your school improvement planning process, your development of your SIP. Certainly you have some schools that are filling out state required documents. In Seminole, we've continued to have all schools go through a formal school improvement plan process and presentation of that plan back to their school advisory council. And as a district leadership team, we're looking at each of those SIPs to be sure that feedback data is making it into the action plans within those school improvement plans. So I think it's about connecting those dots, taking the time to monitor, and then continuing those surveys. Ideally, you want really longitudinal data. You don't want to make too many adjustments because then it gets disconnected from year to year.
And our last question here is, how would you ensure that schools located in under-resourced areas receive the attention and resources they deserve and need?
Great question. The term equity is being used in a lot of different ways now. Again, where I've been trained in Seminole, going all the way back to the desegregation process and the achievement of unitary status, we've all been trained that there are always 2 priorities. One is excellence, right? Performance at the highest standard possible. And the other is equity, that all groups all schools are having the same opportunity and outcome related to excellence, and that no one is falling behind. I think with regards to facilities, certainly there are lots of data metrics that you can take a look at, and of course you're going to see you have to build new schools in your new growth areas, and you can't replace every school every X number of years. So even in schools that are older, the question becomes what's happening on the inside of those schools, right? What programs are being placed at schools that are relevant and exciting to kids? What's happening at each school so that it's building its own identity, so that the community is excited about it, even if it doesn't have the freshest coat of paint on the outside walls. Then the other part of that goes back, I think, to Mrs. Jenkins' question earlier about achievement gaps and doing all of that data and instructional leadership work, because if the data shows that your gaps are closing, that student performance is improving, then you know that your experience is becoming more uniform and that you're reducing variance in terms of student experience and outcomes.
Great, thank you for that. And one of the most important questions is, what do you find yourself doing in your spare time?
Great question. Nicole and I certainly enjoy the opportunity to travel. There's been less of it the last 3 years, more because of work than anything else. We also find that as our son gets a little older, his social calendar becomes our social calendar, right? That the chauffeuring requirements increase. And so the free time that we have ends up at Little League and lots of, lots of those kinds of opportunities. Certainly beyond that, the opportunity to do a little reading, not in education, is always a nice thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rossong. Is there any additional information that you would like to share with the board members?
Well, thank you, Chair Susan. Again, I've been really privileged to serve in Seminole County, for the last 15 years. Lots of leaders, move around for advancement or to get that next experience. I've been the beneficiary of a system that understands leadership development and succession planning and the power of that. And when my, when my colleagues and direct reports either were informed or discovered that I was looking at a superintendent opportunity, it's interesting because we haven't in our history had a lot of candidates looking externally for superintendent jobs. People tend to stay a really long time, but that's because I think, we've all been given new opportunities and continuous challenge. In Seminole, I've worked for 3 superintendents. Dr. Vogel was our superintendent when I was at a high school as an assistant principal, and then the very first part of my district office career. Then Walt Griffin was promoted internally to superintendent and served, I believe, 9 years, and now Sarita Beeman, who was our board attorney, and made the transition to superintendent. So I served 3 superintendents, all very different in their leadership styles and their approaches, but all extremely dedicated to students, and all doing a lot of work behind the scenes, whether it's for an individual student, for a school that has extra needs, and that's the environment that I've been brought up in. Brevard Public Schools is a district that I have watched for years. When we would go early in my administrative career to leadership conferences, Dr. Vogel would talk about Brevard and Dr. DePatri's leadership and the systems that were being put in place. We benchmark ourselves academically, and so Brevard is always a system that I've watched. When I first got career and technical education, and I said that this is completely different from running academic instruction. Everyone said, anytime you have a question, you call Janice Scholes in Brevard. And so, and the first time I called her, she said, come over and spend the day. And so my first trip to Brevard was to meet her and spend the day with her. And so Brevard's always been a great school district. And I would be honored should you choose to select me as your superintendent. I appreciate your time today. Look forward to talking with you individually tomorrow.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Statements?
Thank you so much for coming and participating. I know this is an awkward setting as far as us asking questions. And, I said earlier, I wish we were kind of a round table where it was more of a discussion, but I really appreciate your answers to the questions. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
What was the
It's
last
same,
question?
no, it's the same thing. You have any questions for
Did
the
you
board
have-
members?
Oh, do you
Yeah,
have
no,
any?
we're-
Yes.
we-
Yes.
Do you have any questions for us?
I think the one question, if we have time, I think the one question I'd like to ask, I know many of you have been here in the community for a long time, and I'd love to know what you love most about this community.
Only one thing?
I can go first. So you had brought it up about how Brevard is a long, diverse county with many different communities within it. But I will say the one thing that transcends through every single one of those communities, and it might be a little bit of a different nuance inside of each of them, but is this real pride from being from the Space Coast. That's really important to everybody who lives here. It's again, everyone has a little different piece as to why that's important to them or how it's important to them. But that pride of being on the Space Coast is what I find unique, especially coming from New York City, with, you don't really get that tiny, small community feel. And being such an expansive county, I still feel like it has that feeling and that vibe and that unity.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I don't know if I pick one thing that's the best. I'm a Texan, and so we're very proud of our home state, and I still am proud of my home state. But I have to say, as growing up in a big city, thinking that I'd be going over to Orlando all the time, I have to say what I love about Brevard is everything that I need is here, somewhere in the borders of our county. Unless I need to fly to Texas, in which case I have to go to Orlando. But everything else that I need is right here in this county.
Thank you.
You could connect. I might be the only one. Were you born in?
Oh, we go there. No, I just found out today I was the oldest school board member.
No, I am born and raised Brevard County resident, so I've been here my entire life, and hands down, it's the people. It is the community. So we have community here that is like no other, and I absolutely have a heart for our community and our people.
Thank you.
Like a few of our board members here, I was not born and raised here in
transplants.
Brevard. And unlike Ms. Campbell, I'm from a state where we're not always proud of where we're at. So it's nice to be in Brevard here, where it's a very large county, but no matter where you're at in that 72-mile stretch, what Ms. Jenkins says, the pride of being a part of Brevard, it stretches from one end to the other. So that's refreshing. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So for me, I call it the small big. And what that is that the thing about Brevard is that you will go to eat lunch somewhere and there's a guy sitting next to you with holey shorts and a torn up shirt. And you think that he had just gotten off the turnip truck or something. And you find out that he's the lead engineer for the launch systems outside. And what we have is this difference between this is that we here in Brevard don't try to show off too much as far as what you look like and everything else. We don't wear a lot of ties here. We have a lot of, but a lot of the people here will wear polo shirts, will wear t-shirts, and that's who we are. And the other thing is that as big as we are, we're small. So like I know the mayors up north, but then I also know family members and other individuals all the way up from Mims to Micco. And you have everybody's connected, even though we're big enough, but we're small enough to where we still are all those little communities. So we are all Space Coast. We all do want to be a part of that. But the thing is that there's a difference in Brevard. I do a lot of business around the state of Florida. And I will tell you that Brevard is a special kind of county. And the reason is that we're real here. And we're real politics, we're real people. And that's what I love about it. So thank you.
Real politics, real people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We're good?
No.
Yeah, we're going to go do this. Thank you very much.
Tonight, justice delayed. The highest court in the land extends a decision that could impact millions of women across the country as the Supreme Court weighs the legality of abortion pills. Plus, hola, Rosalba.
Hola, buenos días.
Yo estoy Lindsay.
Bienvenida a la casa, mucho gusto.
So we are about to engage the rainwater harvesting system.
Yeah, we can hear the rain.
Yeah.
coming. In tonight's Prime Focus, we introduce you to the water warriors traveling to Mexico to see firsthand how these small communities struggle to get the clean water they need to survive. And Shake is the man behind some of the top Afrobeat songs in the world. And as the genre becomes one of the most popular on platforms like Spotify, we sit down with him and talk about what's behind the movement.
To me, the way I understand music is like is a feeling. Sometimes you don't even need to understand it.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Dick. On those stories for tonight, including Flashpoint. We'll find ourselves this evening in Kansas City. This work that continue to rise